Adam, last November, you were in front of an abortion clinic and you were silently praying when you were approached by police officers. Can you take us through what happened?
Yeah, I arrived and I was there for barely 2 or 3 minutes, and there were these community police support officers. So not actually police officers, but officers employed by the council to manage antisocial behaviour in and around Bournemouth. And they approached me after I was there for barely minutes and asked me what I was doing. And I said I was praying for my deceased son, Jacob. In fact, no, let me correct that. First of all, they asked me what I was doing, and I said I was praying. Then the female officer asked me, what is the nature of your prayer? I was a bit taken back by that, and I said I was praying for my deceased son. At which point they informed me I was breaching the PSPO order and instructed me to leave the area.
So in that moment, during that interaction, did they fine you? Was there a penalty for it, when they were asking you to leave?
So they informed me that they considered that my praying for my deceased son was a breach of the PSPO, that it was an act of disapproval of abortion, although I wasn't manifesting that prayer in any way. And if I hadn't told them, they would have had no way of knowing what I was praying about.
Because it was silent. This was a silent prayer in your mind, right? You were praying. Yeah.
It was a silent prayer in my mind. I should say I've been praying outside of abortion clinics since 2019 as part of 40 Days for Life. We do keep the authorities informed about our activities. And because there was a buffer zone there, I'd said that, I will be praying, but I will not manifest my prayer in any way. I will not interfere with anyone in any way. I have no signs. I will respect people's privacy. I had my back to the clinic. There was a tree between me and the clinic. And they came, as I've just described, said my mere presence there was breaching the PSPO. And once they declared that I was breaching it with no evidence, they had nothing to say that I wasn't doing anything to upset anyone. I hadn't been there for barely 2 minutes when they came up to me. They just declared that I was breaching it, and that if I failed to move on their instruction, that therefore I would be liable to a fine.
Now, so Adam, I'm going to come back to you in a minute, but Lois, I want to come to you on this because I think there may be people who are watching or listening and they're thinking, what is this PSPO? What are these buffer zones? We don't quite have this, although there are some things happening in the US right now that might mirror this in certain areas, or some attempts to maybe restrict protests or presence outside of clinics. But can you explain to us why these officers were able to come over under the law and say, hey, you can't be here, you shouldn't be doing that?
Absolutely. Well, listening to Adam's story there, you might think that you're listening to an extract from an Orwellian novel like 1984, but no, this is real. It's in 2023, and police did come over to check Adam's thinking and even ended up prosecuting him for such. The reason they were able to do this is because in 5 local UK areas, there has been implemented these, we call them PSPOs, and they have led to a buffer zone or a censorship zone around about the clinic. Quite commonly, it covers several streets, ranging about 150 meters in circumference around the clinic. And in these zones, they ban what they say is the expression of approval or disapproval of abortion. They list, this was brought in for ostensibly good reasons. People who campaigned for it said that this was to end harassment against women. And if that's what these measures, these buffer zones did, then myself, Adam, ADF UK would all be for these things because we all stand against harassment of women. However, this is not in reality what the buffer zones are doing. They're going much, much further to criminalize prayer, handing out leaflets about services available to women who are vulnerable and might want to learn about other options available to them other than abortion. And they criminalize, in Adam's case in Bournemouth, the PSPO buffer zone criminalizes even crossing oneself, reading scripture, various different expressions, basically, of the Christian faith. If Adam had been standing there shouting about another social issue, for example, say climate change, that would have been perfectly legal under the law. He could express thought, opinion, agreement, disagreement with any other social cause. But because he was silently and peacefully thinking about abortion specifically, that empowered the local officers to be able to approach him, find him, and ultimately now take him to court.
And these officers, because I called them police officers at the top, that's what we would be most used to here. These officers, they carry legal weight, although they're not full police officers, right, Lois? Just help us understand that too, just as we talk about this.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, because this is an unusual situation for us too. Normally our local councils take care of things like parking tickets, or kind of much, kind of unthinking, kind of little petty things like that. So it's very strange to us that the council have implemented this PSPO themselves, have written it up, are themselves policing it, and now themselves are prosecuting it. So they've made themselves the judge, jury, and executor of this PSPO situation, which to us is very strange. We don't think that it's a good system, a just system, and obviously the principle behind the buffer zone itself, to censor pro-life thoughts, to censor any thoughts about abortion, is deeply concerning.
And this is something that, as far as I understand it, this has also been passed nationally as well. This is something that will be coming to all of the UK, correct?
That's correct. So this started off as being 5 local councils at the time of the incident in which Adam was involved. There was 5 local councils who had brought in these censorial measures. The government saw this and voted in March to introduce this across the country. So we can expect to see a lot more legal confusion, a lot more potential cases where people have been innocently and either praying, or if they were to hand out a leaflet or offer support to a woman in need, and that would now be considered legal. What we want to know, and what we're hoping to hear from the government soon, is as they have not yet implemented this bill, they're in fact issuing guidance. This is a very common practice. When you pass a law in the UK, the government will then issue guidance to prosecutors and police as to how the best way is to enforce this law, to kind of explain what it means and things like that. So we're waiting for that to be issued. We hope that the government will see sense and put in some protections for freedom of thought in there. But for now, we're waiting to see what unfolds.
Well, thank you for all of that, because that helps us understand, and it sort of brings me back to you, Adam, on this, because you have this experience where these officers come up to you, they're asking what you're praying for, which is very invasive and strange. And this is on video, so people can see the video, it's out there. What was going through your heart and your mind after you left that situation, as you were walking away, as you were leaving after that interaction?
Well, I can't quite believe that our country has plunged to such depths that we now have thought crime in this nation. I'm an ex-serviceman. I love my country. I served the country for 20 years. I'm an Afghanistan veteran, and I was prepared to put my life on the line for this nation because I believe in our values. I believe in the value of freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom to gather. These are a really precious freedom that many nations simply do not have those freedoms. And we need to be a beacon of freedom at the top of the hill, because without the West, without the USA and Britain and our Christian values, freedom will be crushed. And to say that somebody simply thinking the wrong thing in the wrong place at the wrong time is a criminal offense is frankly, it's an offense against our nation. It's an offense against 1,000 years of history. We're a nation under God. We recently crowned the King Charles. He gave pledges to uphold God's law, and yet Bournemouth Council think that they have the right to trample all over that law. They think they have the right to trample over the memory of friends of mine who passed away, defending this nation's freedoms. It's an insult, frankly, to our nation. And for that reason, I refused to pay the fine, and I now find myself being prosecuted.
Well, let's talk about that part, because so obviously you get the fine over this. As far as I understand from what I've read and seen in this case, and you correct me if I'm wrong, it should have sort of ended there. Why did they decide, everyone was sort of shocked that you ended up in court recently and that you were charged over this. Talk a little bit about that. How did that come about? And Lois, feel free to jump in as well, as he's talking about this, because that was the part of this story that I think took people back a little bit.
Yeah, it very much took us by surprise. So I didn't hear anything from the council. I was on the day the officers said to me, you might receive a fine for this. And sure enough, I did receive a fine back in December. And they reissued the fine because of some clerical issue in January. And then I heard nothing. And then in July, I think it was, ADF said, well, the time has lapsed now. They can't prosecute you now because they have to do it within 6 months of the offence. And ADF announced that Bournemouth Council had dropped the case, that there was no case to answer. And as soon as ADF said that, literally the day that they said that, Bournemouth Council posted out a court summons. And that seemed to trigger within the council the court summons. And it turns out the court summons had actually been issued back in May, 2 months earlier, and they hadn't sent it out. So it's a very bizarre situation, frankly, that's unfolding. We've no idea why they sat on it for 2 months, and they sent it out. And last week it was I had to go to court and plead not guilty.
This is a very unusual set of circumstances. You can imagine the shock that we had when that came through. So to give that kind of some behind the scenes context, it is normal for if a council are considering prosecution, or if they would refer it to the police for prosecution, that they would be gathering evidence to support that claim. So they might have had Adam in for an interview. They might be, they'd be making noises, and Adam would certainly normally have expected to hear information from them about what they're up to, what they're thinking about doing, and any further information that they need to get from Adam about what happened that day. As Adam said, we didn't hear anything. But on May 12th, without telling anybody, the council issued a court summons. Now, what is standard normal practice for a council is that they would contact the person who is being summoned on that day. I think the guidance says that they are to be informed as soon as possible. And typically we expect that to mean within about 24 hours. And there's no set limit on what as soon as possible means, but we've certainly never seen it reach the level of 2 months before. But in this case, for whatever reason, and perhaps we'll never know, the council decided not to inform Adam until they saw ADF publicly say, well, that's the time limit up for a charge. So very surprising turn of events. Suddenly on July 19th, they say that Adam is already due in court in only 2 weeks time. I think whether that's a 2 to 3 weeks warning, which is, again, quite short notice for a case like this. And it seems to be handled in a very peculiar, rushed manner, which we wouldn't have expected in terms of standards of care.
So a clarifying question on this too, was the court summons and the charge related because he wouldn't pay the fine? Adam, you wouldn't pay the fine. So is that the root of the charge, or was it the actual act that day, or both?
Well, when I was fined, the fine letter, unbelievably, within the fine letter says that the breach was because I was praying for my deceased son. And so when I didn't pay that's the reason for the summons, because I haven't paid that fine.
What is the penalty? So let's say they find you guilty of not paying this fine. Do they fine you more? Is there some other, what ends up happening next in that case?
Lois could probably answer that better than me. I'm not a legal expert.
No, you're fine. So the what's at stake is it would be a further penalty, it would be a considerable financial cost. But I think what Adam has said so eloquently before is that what's at stake is not only a monetary fine, but is freedom. It's the freedom to be able to express thought in this country. That, I mean, I know in America, you kind of define yourselves as land of the free, which is great. But in the UK, we also hold these traditions. We have the home of the Magna Carta, as Adam mentioned in one of his recent quotes. The whole of people who fought against slavery, that we've carried this tradition. And if it was to be the case that a silent, prayerful thought was to break UK laws, the repercussions for our country would be huge.
Yeah, and I think for the world, I mean, we're watching right now situations in Finland, Malta, Mexico, the UK, and these are all very different cases, but they're all very troubling cases when it comes to religious liberty and religious freedom. And there's a pattern happening. We even had a pastor, or not a pastor, but a street preacher who was arrested outside of a Pride event in Pennsylvania, and they dropped the charges after recently because he shouldn't have been arrested. So, this is something that is happening more and more, and I think the repercussions are huge here. And just as we round out to a close, and I so appreciate both of you taking us through this, Adam, how, when you were at court, after court, speaking out to the media, you were understandably emotional in that. How has this affected your family and your life? Because it has become a very big story internationally.
Well, I've tried to protect my kids from it as much as possible. But yeah, I was very emotional afterwards because I just can't. I'm emotional because obviously I lost a child to abortion, and I've lost a child to miscarriage. And I'm emotional because the propaganda of the abortion industry has so captured our culture. And it has taken a toll, but I'm trying to protect them from it as much as I can. In a way, I think it probably hasn't been publicized enough, in that what I mean by that is Christians know about this. You know about it, Lois knows about it. My Christian friends, the church where I go, know about this issue. But we need the man on the street to know about this. We need the average person who perhaps doesn't watch Christian TV or doesn't follow ADF UK. This has such profound repercussions for our nation. I think the abortion industry are quite happy for this to be kept quiet and to sort of tuck it away and say this is a fringe issue that's only affecting small areas of our nation. Once we crack through this glass ceiling and say that thought crimes can actually occur, at the moment it's only outside of abortion clinics, but once you crack that box open, there's nothing to stop it happening on the high street, or you simply expand the size of the buffer zones. And I mean, at the moment, the national buffer zone is 150 meters, but that's 150 meters in each direction. So that's
490. That's 490 feet. So when we talk in terms of feet, that is a massive area that I know for a fact there have to be businesses and homes that are in those areas. But I would imagine around some of these clinics where people are probably silently praying in their businesses and homes, which is interesting.
Yeah, you could be in a coffee shop that happens to be inside that buffer zone, discussing with your friend the abortion issue, and you are technically speaking breaking the law. If someone took offense at it, you could find yourself in my situation. And somebody's worked out that it's about 26 kilometers squared of British land where you could be prosecuted for a thought crime. And it's just outrageous. It is un-British, frankly. And yeah, it's just wrong, basically.
Well, I appreciate you both taking the time. And I would encourage people, even if you're somebody who's much more progressive or you have a different view on abortion or any of the issues that, we're talking about here, any of these social issues, the fact is this affects everybody, because right now we're talking about this issue, but it could be something else tomorrow. And I think it's really easy to forget that fact when we're talking about these cases. I appreciate your time. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. And if your audience wants to follow more with regard to Adam's story and what comes next, please do be following ADF UK on Twitter and find our website. There's a chance also to be joining us and backing Adam's legal defense with a financial contribution as well. So we really appreciate all support.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.